course you miss. You can't score. Just game point.
Come on, Muggsy Bogues. Is that all you got? All I need is one more basket.
Oh, yeah? Well, bring it on, Shack Attack. I'll just foul you and watch you miss free throw after free throw. What? Bring it.
All right. Okay, come on then, huh? Yeah!
The world is not the same anymore. I thought I had it all figured out. I'm gonna work hard, get a good job, raise a family, retire young and die an old man. If I can do that, death won't be so bad. I'll just cease to exist. I would have lived a good life. But you ruined that for me. Now I can't stop thinking about death. It's hard to imagine that you're just gone. Forever.
Marcus, something I've been meaning to tell you.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
I'm sick, bro.
You look sick out there, man.
No, it's nothing like that. Doctor says I have another 6 months. Year tops.
Come on. You serious?
After you got sick, you asked me what I thought happened when someone dies. I should have said something reassuring about heaven and going to a better place, but I didn't want to sugarcoat it. I told you what I've always believed, that people just cease to exist. There is nothing else after death. I remember the day you told me you believed you were going to heaven, that you had accepted your fate, that you had peace. I don't know why I tried so hard to convince you heaven didn't exist. If you can hear me, I'm sorry. I'd give anything to know where you are. If what I believe about life is true, then your death is a tragedy, a life cut short. But if what you believed about life is true, then a whole new journey has just begun. I wish I could believe that.
Several years ago, my wife and I backpacked through Israel, exploring many of the ancient sites we read about in the Bible. Being there really helped to make the Bible come alive, but not as we had expected. Of all the sites that we saw, there is one that I will never forget. While we were in Galilee, attempting to hitch a ride on a tour boat, we met a Christian South African family on vacation. When they learned that we were also Christians, they invited us to travel with them for the day. Together, we had a wonderful time exploring the area where Jesus had walked and taught around Lake Kinneret, which is also known by its New Testament name, the Sea of Galilee. It became clear that our last sight of the day was the one that this family was anticipating the most. It was also where we learned the significance of their vacation. Getting out of the van, I remember watching Wesley, a 22-year-old, the youngest son in the family, go to the back of the van with his brother-in-law and pull out a wheelchair. This was the first time that they had brought it out, and to my surprise, Wesley sat in it. Looking beside me, I could see Wesley's mom sobbing with her hands covering her face. As they wheeled Wesley down to the lake, one of the brother-in-laws came up beside us and explained that Wesley had recently been diagnosed with cancer and given only 3 months to live. We had no idea. Wesley was young and looked healthy. We learned that this was their last vacation with Wesley. This site was important to the family for its historical significance and because it was where they planned to say goodbye to him. Look, death is a terrible reality that we will all eventually face. It doesn't matter your age or relative health. The truth is that the only thing stopping you from seeing everyone you love and care for die is your own death. Not surprising then, one of the fundamental concerns of humanity is if there is life after death. But have you ever considered what we even mean by that question? I mean, I don't know anyone who simply desires to be alive forever. What Wesley's family made clear to me that day is that the real trauma is not death itself, but the relational separation that it brings. Death is a constant reminder that life worth living is always found in community. This is what makes Jesus' teaching so unique. Jesus offers life before death, relational life with God and people that begins now and never ends. Jesus taught that this is what it means to experience the fullness of living, the meaning of life. In this final session, we will see how Jesus defeated evil and death so that we could fulfill the meaning that we were created for: relationship with God and people. The battlefield where Jesus conquered evil was the cross. What looked like defeat was in fact victory. Yet Jesus' disciples, they didn't see it that way. When Jesus was arrested by the Jewish leaders, they wanted him killed for claiming to be God. The Romans were willing to crucify him to keep the peace, and the disciples abandoned him for not fighting. Crucifixion was about the last thing that the disciples expected for their Messiah. You see, the disciples called Jesus the Christ, or in Hebrew, the Messiah, meaning anointed one, which raised an important question. What exactly was Jesus Christ anointed to do? In the first century, many Jews were looking for a political and military leader like Moses, anointed by God to free them from slavery to Rome. However, Jesus explained that the enemy he came to defeat was much greater than Rome. He was anointed with the task of fulfilling God's promise to free people from slavery to evil and the death that it brings. But why did Jesus need to die? Why doesn't God just forgive people of the evil that they have done? Think about that question like this. Imagine a government that only gives out warnings every time the law is broken, whether that be a speeding ticket, a theft, or a murder. Could you imagine the cry for justice that would come from such a nation? But what about yourself? I think that you would agree that although we want forgiveness, we also want justice. God is merciful, but God is also just. In fact, God is perfect in both his justice and mercy. Here's the problem. The evil of this world is disgusting and awful. It demands justice. This is true not only of the evil that has been done to us, but also the evil or sin we have done to others. The reality is, we are all guilty of evil and need mercy. On the cross, God demonstrated his perfect justice by judging evil and the depths of his mercy by taking our place. Jesus bore the just penalty of evil and sin as though he had done it, so that we could have more than just mercy. We could experience grace. Simply put, justice is getting what you deserve. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. Grace, however, is something good that you don't deserve. So what do we deserve? God's justice. Jesus warned that God's justice is coming. The evil of this world will be judged. So turn away from whatever is keeping you from God and accept his mercy. Relationship with God is only available through grace. Jesus is the grace of God. Through Jesus, we have a gift we don't deserve. His perfect relationship with God in exchange for our broken one. That's how much God loves you. It is then through God's grace to us that we learn to love other people. God saved us to receive love so that we can in turn give love. This relational life with God and people begins now and is perfected when we meet God face to face. But is this true? Is there life after death? When Jesus was nailed to the cross and died, so did the hope of the disciples. They all abandoned him. The disciples had no concept of a dying, let alone rising Messiah. In fact, the Jews believed that when a person died, you went into a place of waiting until the end of the world, when the dead would be raised to new life. In preparation for that day, they carefully tended to the bodies of the dead, collecting their dried bones into stone boxes until God would return. Yet 3 days later, Jesus' disciples learned that his tomb was empty, that he had risen from the dead. History reports that over 500 people saw him raised to new life. The disciples described walking, talking, touching, and eating with the risen Jesus. The centerpiece of Christianity is not that Jesus had a near-death experience, but that he had a death experience, demonstrating not only that he had justly dealt with evil and conquered death, but that he is who he claimed to be, the author of life. Consider that after studying the evidence, both in and outside the Bible, virtually every scholar of antiquity, both Christian and non, agree that Jesus is a historical figure, that he was known as a preacher and teacher who was crucified in Jerusalem during the reign of Emperor Tiberius under Pontius Pilate. After his death, the disciples had experiences which they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. The disciples were transformed from afraid doubters to bold proclaimers of Jesus. Even a Jewish persecutor of the church, Paul, was converted by an experience he likewise believed was an appearance of the risen Jesus. Even James, the brother of Jesus, who had been a skeptic, was converted when he believed that he saw the resurrected Jesus. Imagine what it would take to convince you that your brother was God in the flesh, had defeated death on a Roman cross, and then be willing to die for that belief. In fact, history suggests that all the disciples were willing to die for that belief. As you can imagine, the resurrection was at the center of the disciples' preaching in the early church. The question is not whether or not these historical facts occurred, but how and why. Have you ever considered that Christianity is a religion centered on a historical event? Either Jesus rose from the dead or he did not. The power of the resurrection is that there is life after death, and you can know him, the author of life, who went before you. It was the fuel that spread Christianity across the Roman Empire and the world, continuing to this very day. When I moved beyond merely studying the facts about Jesus and placed my trust in him, I began to experience a relationship with him and the community that comes from life with God and people. And like the disciples, it changed my life. I encourage you to do the same. It also changed Wesley's life. That day at the lake, my heart broke as I listened to Wesley's family say goodbye. Yet that's why this site was so significant to them. This spot along the lake represented hope. Historically, this is the site where Jesus met some of his disciples after returning from the dead, as told in the Gospel of John, chapter 21. This is the scene where Jesus commanded his disciples to go and to share this hope with the world. As followers of Jesus Christ, Wesley's family was not saying goodbye, but more accurately, we'll see you soon. Reflecting on their faith and hope in Jesus, expressing itself in love, I realized that they had found life. The same life the disciples had found and that I had found. Life that did not end with a well-attended funeral, but eternal life and relationship with God and people. We've looked at a lot of questions in this series, so perhaps it's fitting that we conclude with one. What is your hope? Do you have good reason for the hope you have?